My God has promised good to me, whose word my hope secures. That's from the great old hymn. You recognize it, right? Amazing Grace. The former slave trader, John Newton. John Newton seems to be channeling the letter of James when he says, "Humbly welcome the word which has been planted in you, because it has the power to save you." Now, it used to be a thing, it used to be a thing, that folks would say, word. You know where I'm going with this? They would say word when they heard something that sounded true to them. Am I just imagining this? And it wasn't just about agreeing to facts. It was an expression of feeling. It was more like, yeah, sister and brother, I'm feeling this with you. Word. Oh, this is going to be hard. I can tell right now. Well, maybe it's not a thing anymore. But I thought we might try it out this morning. I'm going to offer up a few statements about how I'm feeling right about now, and if they resonate with you. If you find yourself feeling the same way, then I invite you to say, word. Word. Give it a little oomph. We'll be cool. We're going to be cool this morning. So here we go. This country is a mess right now. Word. I am in almost desperate need of hope. Word. I'm going to miss that powerful, inspiring voice of the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. Word. With all that's going on in the world, I'm grateful to be here this morning. Word. I'm tired. You can say word right there. I'm tired. I'm tired of defending myself against those who claim to be Christians but spend most of their time supporting the actions of greed and hate. Word. Oh, word. Now, if you said word to that last one, you're in good company, because that's the place where James finds himself when he's talking about welcoming the word that has been planted in you and that has the power to save you. True religion, James says later on, true religion, pure, unspoiled religion, is this: coming to the aid of widows and orphans when they are in need. That's the word. Imagine, for instance, that when John Newton wrote Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, he planned to just go on living his life as a captain of a slave ship. If you ask old John Newton about that amazing grace that saved him, it was not just about how his life was changed, it was about the way those words caused him to want to change the world. Just how amazing is grace anyway, if it ends up being an excuse for continuing to treat other human beings as if they are property. As I said a couple weeks ago, the power of amazing grace is not only that it's the personal testimony of someone who felt like a wretch, it is the public rallying cry to resist and to dismantle that whole wretched system of slavery. You'll hear about a lot of the books that I read on vacation, because that's what I do. But one of the books I read was Yag Yassi's book, Homegoing. If you want to know about the impact of generations of slavery, that's the book to read. It's beautifully written. It's like James says, act on the word, because if all you do is listen to it, you're deceiving yourself. Now, when I wrote the article for the Spire, which you've all read about James, right on the cover, nice picture of James there on the cover. When you read that, you know that I mentioned that several of our ancestors, including the great reformer Martin Luther, thought that this little letter had no place in the Bible. Some said it was too Jewish. We'll talk about that one later. But for now, I'll just say that if James intends to take seriously that the Jesus we follow was in fact a Jew, it's always surprising to me when I have to tell people that. You mean Jesus was not a Christian? No, Jesus was a Jew. That's the Jesus we follow. That James, who wants us to take the Jewish Jesus seriously, that James, I think, would feel right at home among us here, right? Amen? Word. Right? Word. Now, probably the most challenging thing for James is that this letter gives us a peek into the open conflict going on in the early church. You have Paul, for instance, saying those famous words, "It is by grace you have been saved through faith, not of works." And then James comes along and says, well, maybe that's true, but faith without works is dead. And James has some very particular things in mind. He talks about how we communicate, about how we treat the world and the people around us. And since this is Labor Day weekend, here are some thoughts of James on the consequence of how working people get treated. Are you ready? This is the end of James chapter 4, the beginning of James 5. Anyone who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, to that person it is sin. Now, he says, an answer or a response for the rich. Weep and howl for the miseries that are coming to you. Your wealth is all rotting, your clothes are eaten up by moths, your gold and silver are corroding, and the same corrosion will be your own sentence. It will consume your flesh like fire. That is what you have stored up for yourselves to receive at the last day. Laborers mowed your fields, and you cheated them. Listen to the wages that you kept back. You know, sometimes we talk about wage theft these days. Listen to the wages that you kept back. They call out against you. Realize that the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of our God Most High. On earth you have had a life of comfort and luxury. You have been fattening, this is amazing. You have been fattening yourselves for the day of slaughter. Happy Labor Day, everyone. And then this. It was you who condemned the innocent and killed them. They offered you no resistance. Now that's pretty harsh. And the thing that sticks in my mind is that they offered you no resistance. It reminds me of that iconic line from the Borg Queen in the Star Trek series, resistance is futile. That's the belief system. The faith that benefits the rich and the powerful is that there's no point in resistance because change is not possible. There is no point in resistance because nothing you do matters. There is no point in resistance because this is the best you can hope for. Resistance is futile. But James is saying that the word that has been planted in us as those who are trying our best to follow the way of Jesus, that word is exactly resistance. Resist that which makes you feel like you and those around you don't matter because, as James says, make no mistake, my dear brothers and sisters, every worthwhile gift, every genuine benefit comes from above, and that includes you. Resist that kind of anger that does not serve justice. Resist those ways of being together that promote privilege and prejudice. Resist those ways of dealing. This is all from James. You can read. I hope you'll go home and read. It's 5 chapters. You can do that in one sitting. Resist those ways of dealing with workers that disrespects their labor because our faith is not just about what we say, but what we do. Again, on vacation, I started reading a book, this is what I do on vacation, about the Rockefeller family called America's Medicis. Joan Bowers gave me this book to read. It's mostly about the educational and cultural contributions of the Rockefeller family, which are astounding. It was especially fascinating for me because the Rockefeller family, in addition to being extremely wealthy, were committed Northern or now American Baptists. The Rockefellers did a lot of great things. They helped to build the University of Chicago and the famous Riverside Church in New York City, and they underwrote the beginning of the American Baptist Ministers Retirement Fund. Any of you American Baptist retired ministers? Thank God for John D., right? However, right, like the other robber barons of the late 1800s and early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller Sr. was known for his ruthless business practices. And the treatment of workers at the time eventually led to the founding of the American Federation of Labor. Having been trained at Brown University, which is historically a Baptist institution, having been trained at Brown University, John Jr. came under the influence of a social justice Baptist who happened to be president of Brown at the time. And John Jr. began removing himself, as he came into the family business, removing himself from the boards of many of the family's businesses in order to concentrate on philanthropy. And then something happened. The family continued to have a controlling interest in something called the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, which was notorious for unsafe working conditions and the exploitation of workers who worked for long hours for low wages. The United Mine Workers had tried to unionize the workers, but the Rockefeller family not only refused, John Jr. actually went to Capitol Hill to testify at Congress about why that should not happen. In September 1933, 9,000 workers went on strike, which meant not only that they were losing their wages, right, it meant that they were losing their homes. Because who owned their homes? The mine. So the workers set up tent colonies of resistance. Eventually, violence broke out, and the company's guards torched, set on fire the tents where the strikers were living. 2 women and 11 children died. According to the book, that was the turning point for John Jr. He went directly to Colorado and hired a Canadian labor expert, I'm just saying, to work through the struggle. The situation made him aware, the author says, of the inequities of the world, and he became a spokesman for new, more equitable industrial relations. Yet, I quote, yet he stinted on the benefits of his own household staff. What this story tells me is that resistance is not futile, but neither is it ever perfect or complete. Latino theologian Miguel de la Torre says, wherever oppression resides, one can also find resistance. Resistance happens, and it is not futile, but it is also often imperfect and incomplete. And James would say, resist anyway. Now, this is what I think I'm learning about resistance. It's not about just what we reject. It's about what we embrace. James says that we should resist anger that does not serve God's justice, not simply because we should reject those unproductive strategies for protest, but because we imagine and we embrace a different way of communicating with each other. We resist the ways of being together that promote privilege and prejudice, not just because we reject discrimination, but because we embrace diversity, and we can imagine what the beloved community looks like. We resist ways of dealing with workers that disrespects their labor, not only because it's bad for business, but because we embrace every sister and brother as a gift from God. That was Ben's message to us in song this morning, right? Word, my brother, word. Resistance is not futile. And it is not only rejecting evil. It is embracing, no matter how imperfectly or incompletely, that which is good. My God has promised good to me, the old slave trader says, whose word my hope secures. And I'm in desperate need of some hope this morning. I need to know that resistance is not futile. I need to know that we shall overcome someday. So this day, today, if you hear that voice, if you hear that word of hope, for God's sake, for your sake, for the world's sake, do not harden